What's up, all? So I'm in a 120, just so you can kind of get the gist of what it looks like to be in a 120. Just kind of clearing it, doing the thing. Um, I'm I kind of did this video so I could break down a little bit more what the like what the build actually involves and why it works. So uh, I thought that would be a thing that would be useful to people that kind of want to either just understand the build that they're using better, or go in and use the concepts for other stuff they want to try to do on the spirit board. So we'll cut straight from this thing over into the breakdown of it. I did a little presentation for you guys, so appreciate it. Enjoy it. Okay, so this is a breakdown of basically how we break the Spiritborn damage and the little pieces that go into it so that you know what they are for how you're building your character, and also so that if you want to try other builds or do different things, you can kind of try to like go and salvage these things out of this build and use them in other builds as well. Okay, so the first thing is this viscous shield. This is in your Paragon board, and this thing is potentially coded in a way that wasn't intended, I think, because the damage buff that this gives is absurd. Okay? This thing is says you get a percent damage for each 3% of your max life you have as a barrier, but it's calculating that off of your base health. So like the health you would have if your character was naked with no Paragon points and no skills selected and all that kind of stuff in town. Okay? Then when we add all these like health increases that we get, that buffs our health tremendously, so that what we have is what looks like to this calculation like whatever 15,000% HP or something like that, right? And then when we get the 1% per 3% of max life as barrier, we're getting like a 5,000% increased damage or whatever. So this one, all you need to do is select it in your Paragon board. Make sure that you're getting barrier generation stacked on your armor, so that you're barriering 100% of your actual HP, and that's it. You get a huge buff. Okay, so this one is really transferable to other builds that we're doing and stuff like that. We just want to make sure that we're getting barrier. The way that most people are doing that right now is with your Earthen Bulwark. Okay, you're procking the Druid's Earthen Bulwark and then having barrier generation on your armor, so that that thing, when it procs, is 100% of your HP instead of 45% of your HP. Okay? And that takes 125% ish um, barrier generation to make that happen. Okay, the next piece is the crit chain. Okay, so the crit chain is based around these two items. All right, you don't need great ones to start out, but you're going to be looking for ones that have, that are ancestral, that have the stars on them, right? And you're going to be hoping for good rolls on the unique trait, right? Good rolls on the stats if you can get it, that kind of thing. Okay? The big thing here though is we want the unique trait on the ring, this thing over here, to be around 50%. Okay? It doesn't have to be all the way at 50%, but ideally it is. And I haven't had too much trouble getting rings that have 50% on it. Um, Getting one that has a star and is 50% is a little bit more difficult. I settled for a star on Mirage, which is borderline worthless, but it does just raise the item level of the thing from 750 to 800, so that's something. But if it's 50%, then it's easier for us to get to the point that we restore all of our vigor with every swing. Okay? So the idea is this one says that if our vigor is full, we will crit. Okay? And then it gives us this big crit damage multiplier on it. Okay? And this one says if you crit, you'll regen ideally 50% of the vigor that you spent in the last 2 seconds, which is the swing that we just made, right? Now, actually, it's going to be a bunch of swings, so you can kind of get around it, but this takes away any kind of ramp up time. It makes sure there's no holes in it and keeps you at critting every single swing, okay? Which is what we want. Okay, so we get this thing to 50% on the roll, and then we stack resource generation. Okay, I put the formula up here for people that want to see it. Um, you don't necessarily have to know. If you want to use this formula here, you can calculate what it is based on the ring. This is why I said mid to high 40s is what you kind of want. If it's low 40s, you start to get pretty high, but it's still doable. If it's below 40%, it's really, really hard to get your regen to be your full vigor bar. Probably possible, I guess, but it's really hard. You're gonna have to kind of mess up other things in your build. Ideally, it's 50% on the ring, which means you need 100% resource regeneration to double your resource regeneration. Okay, so that the 50% is 100%, and then that way we have the lowest kind of requirement for how much resource generation we need to stack, which means that we waste the fewest number of slots possible on our gear. Okay, so we can use those slots for other things that will up our damage more. Okay, and then with that, we stack on top of it this crit damage block and resolve kind of complex. Okay, so we have these two items. We have a roll on the ring and resource generation that allow us to crit on every single swing. Okay, this thing makes us crit when our resource is full, and this one makes us refill our resource every time we crit. So now we're spending all of our resource and refilling all of our resource every single time we swing the weapon, which is also really good for the rune that gives you uh, proc sauce on spending your vigor. Okay, so you can get barrier really fast. So we're spending all our source, generating all our source every single swing because we did 1 and 2, and then 3 comes into play. Now these things don't have to go together, right? You can use 3 with other builds that crit, but obviously how much your crit damage buffs your total damage depends on how often you crit, right? In this case, because we used 1 and 2 to crit on every single swing, now this crit damage is just a flat buff to our damage, okay? And this gets absurd. My crit damage when I'm in the middle of like fighting a bunch of guys, I want to say is like 15 or 20,000%, something like that. It's insane, okay? So that is what's pushing your damage to these really high levels on top of that viscous shield that we talked about, where that thing is pushing our damage to high levels on its own, right? And these two things are going to multiply each other, and you're going to get this humongous damage. Okay. The other nice thing about crit damage is it goes in different buckets. If you don't know about buckets in Diablo 4, it's a thing to look up. Basically, some plus damage stats, like say plus base damage, will go in one kind of like bucket where it catches a whole bunch of different stats and they all get added together. And then crit damage is its own bucket. It's this separate bucket that gets multiplied by all those other stats that got added together on the other side. So having things in different buckets is really good because this percent damage, instead of getting added to like base damage or something like that, or basic damage, it gets multiplied by it. So when this thing is 15,000%, you're getting like 15 or 150 times the damage that you would get if you just had the other kind of stuff all added together, right? So crit damage ends up being a really huge multiplier. In a lot of builds, it can be really difficult to get your damage really high if you're not taking advantage of crit damage because it has this separate bucket mechanic going on. So how we're getting that is essentially this thing, this aspect of redirected force is our requirement. It's turning our block chance into crit damage, and this can actually overcap. So you're not stuck at 100% block chance, even though if you think about it, like kind of in the mechanics of the game, once I'm at 100% block, I'm just blocking everything, right? But the actual stat behind the scenes can go higher than 100%. So when this thing, when Armored Hide, which is one of my spells, gives me 100% block chance, it's actually overcapping me, right? So if I already have like 100% block chance and then I add this one, I actually have 200%. And for the purposes of calculating redirected force, it thinks I have 200%. Okay. It doesn't just say, nope, 100% is the highest, like kind of effective block chance. It says, no, you actually have 200% of this stat. I'm going to use that to calculate this. Okay. So if we're not playing the Overpower build, we don't have that talisman yet, or we don't have the resource pool that we need, we're going to have this on our neck so that this number in here gets multiplied by 1.5. Okay, so just so that we make it bigger, there's not really anything better to put on our neck to be multiplying by 1.5 than this redirected force. Once we have the overpower neck and the resource pool that we need, we're going to move this to a ring or our gloves. Okay, those are the only two slots that are left for this type of affix. So we're going to move it to the ring or the gloves and just get it as the base that it is. So at max 70%. and Armored Hide's giving us block. And then the other thing that we're doing to kind of go into this block into crit damage kind of complex is we're adding in this resolve stacking. Okay. Now, at the very highest level, it seems like health stacking is probably better for stacking into Viscous Shield and into your overpowers once you have the overpower neck. But I found when I was leveling and stuff, resolve stacking was great. I'm still using resolve stacking. It works fantastic. Okay. So that comes from this. It says this one says I just copied this from Wowhead, but this one says 9% block chance per resolve stack. It's actually I think between 5 and 15. Mine is 11. I know if you're lucky and you have the full max roll on it, you get a 15% block chance per resolve stack, okay? And that can stack to insanity, right? So I think when I use Armored Hide and it gives me my maximum resolve stacks here from Enhanced Armored Hide. You see here? When you pop it, it gives you your max resolve stacks. I think I have 24, 22 or 24 resolve stacks, right? So that's times, say, if it was like 10%, then what I'm getting is actually 220 or 240% block chance, right? So then in this case, right, if I have like 22, I'm getting 242% block chance with mine that says 11% per stack, right? So that is going to go into this, right? And then when I pop this, I'm going to get the extra 100%, right? Now I'm at um, 342, and then I also have like 45 on my staff, right? This says 90, but that's not correct. It actually has 45 on it, right? So now I'm at 287, right? And everything that has block is just going to add to it. Block from your Paragon tree, it all adds to it. And then this thing takes a percentage of it and it multiplies. See, the little X is telling us it's multiplicative, multiplies it by your crit damage, right? Multiplies it by your crit damage stat, and that's what you end up with as crit damage, and that stat just goes through the roof because of this kind of little complex that you have going on here, and it turns Armored Hide from a defensive cooldown into an offensive cooldown. Right now, we're popping this for damage. That's the only thing we're popping it for. As far as defensive, we don't give a damn about that. We're here for the damage. Okay. And then the last thing is you see the last little piece that kind of escape people on here. Blocking doubles this bonus for 10 seconds. You want to let mobs hit you so that you can block and proc this, right? You don't just like don't CC them instantly all the time, right? Or don't pop your counterattack and go to 100% dodge instantly all the time. Let them throw something at you, let them swing something at you just for a split second before you start attacking so that you block once and get this proc and then do your humongous damage. Okay? But this thing could also be used in a different build, not with these two items. If you have these two items, you're basically in this build. This build can be done with any skill that becomes a core skill, is or becomes a core skill. So all four of the core skills, Touch of Death or Payback, can all be used with this. Uh, but without these two, and without the resource generation is only useful when you have these two items, okay? But this kind of crit damage thing, this crit damage little complex over here, that could be used with anything, okay? It's not specific to this build, but obviously in any other build, it's only as useful as your crit percentage makes it, right? Your crit chance makes it. So if I'm only going to crit 15% of the time because I haven't put any crit on my gear, this is a lot less useful than in this case where I'm critting 100% of the time, right? Obviously. So if I'm going to use this for a different build, this little crit damage complex, then I need to make sure that I'm putting crit chance into my build somehow. Okay, with a different talisman, with crit on my gear, with whatever, right? So if you have a basic attack build that you're building, you need to make sure that this thing, if you're going to use this kind of little crit damage complex on the Spiritborn, you go out and you make sure that you're going to crit in your build. Okay. And then the last thing, the last kind of like iteration of this build is when we get into the overpower chain. Okay. The overpower chain is when we put on this amulet. Okay. And it says to spend 275 of your primary resource. It's actually a little less, but I'm not completely sure why. I've seen people guessing that it has something to do with the base cost of the spell or something like that, or like spell cost reduction or something. I'm not 100% sure, but you can go to the combat dummy in Kjolvastad and you can hit it, and this thing will put a little buff that has a 275 on your character when it's ready. And if you have enough primary resource that it's working, that 275 buff when you're sitting there slapping the dummy will never go away. Okay, so you can tell that you have enough. It's actually just under. I think that I can get away with like, I want to say the mid 250s or the low 250s, and the buff never goes away. I know at like 260 the buff never goes away for me. So it's somewhere below, but I haven't figured out exactly how to calculate how low it's going to be. You can always test it on the dummy though and just see if the buff never goes away, it's working. Okay, and then you get your max resource by stacking it on your gear and getting it from your Paragon board. So these nodes in your Paragon board, you use these glyphs that buff either magic nodes or rare nodes. Okay, um, that I put it backwards here. The rare node is the yellow and the magic is the blue. So I don't know why I crossed them instead of lining them up, but I've seen a lot of people using hubris because it buffs the blue ones and it gives a huge buff, and so you can get the max resource that you need for this with kind of less gear input. And if your glyph is at a little bit lower level, you can still get it. Okay, so this one is going to give you more total maximum resource than this one. But I found that with the little bit of max resource on my gear and then the glyph maxed out, I found that I could get enough max resource to proc the Banished Lord's Talisman on every swing with Outmatch. And I found that my damage specifically on bosses was a lot better with Outmatch than with Hubris. And so I use Outmatch in the thing, but a lot of people are using Hubris. Either one is fine. Also, Menagerist is another one that people use in there. Basically, you're just looking for something that buffs the magic nodes, and you want to uh, get the buffs onto these specific nodes to get your max resource up. And once you have 275, this one says when you spend 275, your next core skill is an overpower. That just makes it so every single swing now, every time I spend 275, I get an overpower. Now I'm spending 275 with every swing. It's just like the crit one, right? I'm spending all my sauce, recharging it, and the amount of sauce that I'm recharging is 275, or at least the talisman thinks it is. And so I crit and overpower on every swing. I get the dark orange numbers on every single damage instance of every single swing of the Quill Volley. Now I'm popping off, okay? And then this one will also work. This whole thing all goes together in this chain to work in this build with any core skill, right? So the same thing would be happening if I was using Crushing Hand or whatever the Jaguar one is, right? Like whatever. It works with all of them. So that's how we get to this place. There are some other things in there. There's some things with the Jaguar primary class thing and that kind of stuff. But these are the basic things that could potentially kind of transfer. The Overpower thing doesn't transfer as well to other builds, but this piece gives you an idea of like how you stack things to take advantage of this kind of stuff, whether it's this build or other builds. And this piece just is just a thing that you can just put on a Spiritborn with any build and get a bunch of extra damage. Okay, so those things all go together. There is more that goes into the build for getting it with the Jaguar first choice for your class specific thing. But ultimately, these are kind of the key things that get you going on this build, get you started, and the kind of things that you're kind of trying to get in order as you build up your character to get it, into this point of absurdity in the end game. So go out, get those things. Hopefully, the knowledge of how it works a little bit helps, and you can go build this thing up.